Hello, everyone. This is Dorie Clark, and we're here with our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better, where we talk to leaders about important issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this week's guest is Morra Mele. She is the author of the new book, The Anxious Achiever. She's also a podcaster. She has a podcast with the same name. Morra, it's wonderful to have you here.
Hi, Dorie.
Excellent. I'm so happy to have you. And maybe you can start us off as you start the book off by talking a little bit about your journey of how this came to be your topic. How did you end up writing a book and creating a podcast about anxious achievers? How, I wonder? Please
I
tell
don't
us.
know. They say write what you know. Um, it's actually funny. I have had anxiety since I was 19. I have clinical anxiety. I have major depressive disorder, and actually only recently got a diagnosis of bipolar 2 disorder. So I have managed my mental health my entire adult life. It has been a very important part of my adult life and something that has been a huge impact on how I work. And it began to be something I started talking about. I wrote a book called Hiding in the Bathroom, How to Get Out There When You'd Rather Stay Home. That was a business guide for people who are introverted or have social anxiety. I'm also a big introvert. And as I talked about that book, I just talked about what it was like to be so anxious and try to function in a world that doesn't really accept anxiety very well. And people's eyes would light up. It was like they felt seen, they felt an opening to entertain something about themselves that is usually kept very private in a setting about career and strength. And, I just thought, this is it. This is what I want to talk about. And I pitched the show idea to Harvard Business Review in 2018 maybe, and we started it. And the whole goal behind The Anxious Achiever is to interview leaders from all walks of life who manage mental health challenges, from anxiety to depression to OCD to bipolar disorder, ADHD, and really hear how they've learned to work and lead differently because of those challenges, but also how it's made them who they are.
Yeah, that's amazing, Maura. Thank you. And one of the things that I was struck by, in reading your book is you talk about the fact that you're really doing this podcast, writing the book, so that people can come out and talk about some of these issues that often get swept under the rug. But you still mention early in the book that you have what you call your sort of white whale of a podcast guest who is a well-known CEO that suffers from anxiety that you would love to have come on the show, but this person is resistant and kind of keeps punting, largely because, presumably these issues are still stigmatized enough that they don't feel comfortable talking about it. I mean, obviously you're doing work to try to open up the conversation, but how do you advise someone who, presumably is a regular employee? They, probably have less power and less money than this CEO. And they say, oh my gosh, well, how can I talk about this if, that guy or girl isn't willing to do it? What's your advice for sort of the regular person on the street who's like, oh my gosh, I'd love to be able to say something, but I'm a little bit scared that it
I'm
wouldn't be well
vulnerable.
received?
My advice actually is going to sound counterintuitive, which is you don't have to talk about it. I'm fascinated by status. And I had the Stanford sociologist Marianne Cooper on my show recently, and we were talking about this exact question. And as a sociologist, she looks at who has status in organizations, right? Who has the power? And if you talk about something and you don't have power in an organization, say you're on your way up, you're young, you're from a group that is considered marginalized traditionally in the halls of corporate America, and you speak up about something vulnerable, that may not be the best thing for you, and it's your choice. That's why I'm so focused on leaders, on people who do have the power to tell their stories, because nothing will change until the people we admire, the people who are managing us, the people who are creating trends and innovations, and indeed helping us get through hard times, which anxious people are really good at, are more open and honest. And so my plea is always, leaders, tell your stories. Dorie, is this edited?
We typically don't exactly edit
Because
it,
my
but
husband is being very loud, and I just want to make sure. I'm so sorry.
thank you. We do not hear your loud
You
husband.
can't? Okay.
No, we're good. We're actually good, but
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. So do you want to cut that out, or I'm sorry. I was getting anxious.
I mean, I feel like this is a good meta moment,
That's
but
fine. We can keep it in.
all right. I love it. See,
That's a perfect
we
example.
roll. We roll with it. Absolutely.
Let me tell you, working from home has introduced people to a whole new level of workplace anxieties, right? Because, it can be so distracting. We're on camera, we're focused, we're performing. That makes us anxious. And then the dog's barking, the husband is being loud. And all of a sudden it's, oh gosh, is Dory going to think I'm not professional?
I think that is a perfect, powerful, teachable moment, Morra. That's
All right, then.
amazing.
That's what we like.
Yes. So this is Dorie Clark. We're here with our weekly interview show, Better, sponsored by Newsweek. We're here with our guest, Morra Aarons Mele. She's the author of The Anxious Achiever. So, Morra, I want to touch on something you were mentioning a moment ago, which is actually one of the things that I thought was interesting in your book that you described was this sort of underappreciated positive benefits of anxiety in a leader. That, this makes sense. As with all things, there's two sides of the coin. And in some ways, anxiety actually makes people better at what they do. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, and there's two ways that anxiety can make you better. The first is situationally. We all have that experience of being anxious before something really big happens, before we really care about something. Anxiety shows you care, says one of my favorite psychologists. And so you can use that anxiety. And indeed, in The Anxious Achiever, we look at people whose anxiety drives them. And sometimes they feel like that's a great thing. And sometimes it gets really exhausting. And that is the knife's edge of anxiety. Anxiety, like many different emotions and many pieces of our messy humanity, can cripple us and leave us so that we feel like we can't leave our beds and we're having panic attacks. And trust me, I have been there. We can walk around with a moderate level of anxiety, which I would say the majority of people are today because the world is just so scary and uncertain. Or we can feel what scientists call good anxiety, which is that motivating energy that drives us to do our best. And all of that anxiety is useful, even the really dark stuff, although that takes much more work and time to unpack. But, like all challenges, it can make us very resilient and strong and self-aware. And self-awareness is the leadership quality that is most sought after and yet very elusive.
Yeah, I think those are such good points. You also talked a lot about some of the other benefits like better planning and better empathy that come with anxiety. I thought that was interesting. Would you mind going into that a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, there's data that show that people with social anxiety do have more empathy. It's like they are so used to being attuned to all the signals in the room that they are more easily able to empathize with what other people might be feeling in terms of social anxiety signals, dynamics, and again, when we've been through hard things and we've dug through the dirt, as the Peter Gabriel lyric goes, we do have more empathy because we have been through something hard and we know that many other people are going through hard things. That is literally what creates human connection. I think one of the most underestimated qualities of the anxious leader, though, is that ability to look ahead, is the forward planning. At some level, a lot of our anxiety is about uncertainty and the fear that exists in the gray areas. But that's what leaders need to deal with. Leaders need to look at all of those open questions, especially now, and say, we better have a plan for this, And, again, it's a knife's edge. You don't want to get paranoid. You don't want to be stuck in the worry and ruminating. But when you can get in touch with what the anxiety is trying to tell you, you can make a plan.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. We're here with Morra Mele. The new book is The Anxious Achiever. This is Dorie Clark with our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. Now, Morra, something that I'm curious about, and you do allude to this in your book, is some of the ways that anxiety might be impacted by being part of a traditional, I'll say in air quotes, a minority group, ways that race or gender or class might factor into this. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, excuse me, one of the points that I want to make in the book, even though the book is very much about tools that you can use to help yourself, is that this is a systemic issue. And it's often referred to as anxiety of the only. And it makes sense. And there's tons of data to back this up, that if you are an only at work, whether you're part of an underrepresented minority, whether you come from a different social class or region than most people, if you're a woman, if you're LGBTQ, if you're gender non-binary, if you are different, if you're neurodivergent, if you're different, sadly, in our culture, you face bias. And in workplaces where leadership is seen still to this day in all too limited a way, especially usually like a white guy at the front of the room, the anxiety of the only is natural because you are facing both bias, racial trauma, perhaps, but also that sense of, I'm the only one here. Do I belong here? How long until they find me out? And so it's really not in your head. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. But I also think, and this is why I try to have a lot of white men with power on my podcast and in the book, that anxiety is a normal human emotion. We all feel it. And it's very, very important for the guys at the top to talk about theirs too.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you, Morra. So, something that I was really interested in your book, The Anxious Achiever, you actually tell a story about tracing back some of the roots of your anxiety in terms of of specific workplace performance to an experience that you had as the president of your high school class. And I thought this was really interesting that, we need to sort of be aware that some of the things that may be manifesting today in terms of our, regular professional lives actually sort of go way back. They relate to things in our past that we may not have fully connected. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, as the therapists like to say, wherever you go, there you are. We bring our whole selves to work, and that includes a lot of ourselves that may have been hurt along the way, or the messages that shape us, the expectations that have shaped us. I can't tell you how many people I've had conversations with who have had aha moments around, I never really understood the weight of other people's expectations that I was carrying around in my head that was making me so anxious. And that's where a lot of perfectionism comes from, and other anxious behaviors. So I was student body president, scholar athlete. You will be unsurprised about this story. I ran for student body president at the last minute because I thought it would look good on my college resume, and I didn't really have a plan. And in my senior year, every Thursday we had the student body meeting, and it was all the teachers I really respected, the head of school, students, and I didn't have a plan. And for some reason, in my stupid 17-year-old head, I never thought, you better come up with a strategy here. And so we would have really uncomfortable meetings where there would be like nothing on the agenda. And this was sort of pre-mentorship era, and the teachers didn't really help me. And it was sort of a bad situation. And it actually created a lot of trauma for me. So much so that every Thursday I would have a migraine and I would be nauseous. I dreaded those meetings. I felt so much shame. Fast forward about 6 years later, when I was in my first management job, I had a big job. I was running marketing for a European online travel company, and I was young for the job. And we had a Thursday staff meeting. And
Stay away from Thursdays, Morra. Have we
telling you,
learned our
man,
lessons?
Thursday lunchtimes, and the same symptoms kept coming up. And what I did, though, was I gave away my power at these meetings. The imposter syndrome, the shame was too much. And so I let my deputy run them. I thought, I'm not good at this. I can't be in charge. Fast forward to a later career, actually very recently, I had, again, Thursday staff meetings with a challenging new boss, same thing. And then I was in therapy. This is a year ago. And my therapist said, Morra, this trauma from your high school is still with you and you're acting it out.
Yeah, it's amazing. So when the pieces clicked for that, like what happened? Like did it, or was there a way that something unlocked or you were able to do something differently, or what was the net result of discovering that connection?
I mean, it was just a really interesting aha. And to me, I really love patterns and am big when I coach people at helping them look at their patterns. And it was so interesting to me that I had never picked up on this pretty influential pattern in my own life. And also a lifelong habit I've had of giving away my power because I don't feel I deserve it. And that really began a shift for me. Plus, no more Thursday meetings.
Yeah, definitely not. Let's stay away from that day. Well, that's super interesting. So, Maura, one of the things that you mention in your book is not always, but sometimes a sort of downstream result of people feeling anxiety is procrastination, and that's obviously something that is a troubling behavior for many people. What can we do about that? How should we think about that?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a scholar who I really admire, Bonnie Hayden Chang, and she studies anxiety at work. And she says, anxiety is just, it's data. It's not good or bad. What matters is the emotional regulation and how we react to the anxiety. And the beauty is in the reaction, because the truth is we can't make life less anxious. We can't even control the things that trigger us. We can control how we react when we're anxious. And procrastination is an avoidance behavior. It's a coping mechanism, right? If you just watch Netflix for an hour, then that report doesn't exist. Except, let's be honest, it comes back twice as hard when the hour of Netflix is over. It's what people might call a maladaptive behavior. And so in the book, we really look at how you react to your anxiety triggers in a work context and ask, is that serving you? Is there a different way to respond? Is there a way to take a beat before you react? So much of this stuff is reflexive. It's habit. It's habit. And a lot of the work comes in noticing the habit and trying to respond differently.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Maura. Thank you for that. And one of the things that you actually talk about in the book is what you call the concept of playing detective with your anxiety. Can you talk about what you mean?
Yes, and this was inspired by my good friend Rebecca Harley, who is a psychology professor at MGH. And this is a concept in psychology anyone who's been in therapy will be familiar with, but it's super helpful at work, which is literally tuning in. I think a lot of us, especially when we're successful and busy, we are tuned out. We're tuned out of how our body feels. We're tuned out of our moods. We're tuned out when people make us uncomfortable or cross our boundaries, or when we get triggered, we just tune out. Sometimes we reach for the Snickers bar to feel better. We avoid, we exercise, we do all sorts of things to avoid feeling. And the process of playing detective is saying, you know what? I'm going to tune in. Why did my stomach flip when I saw that email from that person? Why did I feel that feeling of dread and anxiety? Why every Thursday do I have a migraine? And it really is. It takes time. And a great way to start is actually tuning into your body and how your body feels throughout the workday, because anxiety is a whole body reaction and it happens so often in our body.
Yeah, I love that point. That's really interesting, Maura. Thank you. So I wanted to go back to something you were alluding to earlier, which is a subject that you dealt with extensively in your first book, Hiding in the Bathroom, which is social anxiety. I think a lot of people, especially coming out of the pandemic, you hear lots of people say, "I've forgotten to be how to be around people anymore," and they're feeling just particularly nervous about conferences or social gatherings or what have you. What is your advice for people that feel a lot of tension or nerves around this kind of question of social anxiety?
I mean, my number one piece of advice is just to acknowledge it and accept it and name it, right? Don't pretend like you're not feeling it. A classic technique when you're not acknowledging your social anxiety is to drink lots of cocktails. Never done that. So it's really important to say, I'm feeling anxious about this. If you can name it even more, I haven't been to a conference in a long time. I'm worried my small talk is rusty. I'm worried my clothes are outdated. I'm just feeling really out of practice. Then you can actually rehearse. And I'm a big believer in rehearsing. You can think about walking into that cocktail party. What am I wearing? What am I standing like? I sometimes put myself into character. What's my opening line? Rehearse, practice, get more comfortable with the idea. And the other thing is to really be gentle on yourself, not to build in too high expectations. You can give yourself an out and you can say, I'm going to wear this. I'm going to, give myself a pep talk before I walk in the room. I've got my first 2 minutes of conversation if I get nervous about how to start a conversation. And if by 25 minutes I'm still feeling anxious, I'm going to leave and that's okay. Because we have to give ourselves a bit of grace too.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I mean, I know for me personally, I don't love large group
Mm-mm.
situations, and so I often try to just deliberately choose. I don't think for anybody it's a good option to just say no, I won't interact with people at all because you kind of have to do it. But I think we can make more strategic choices about the types of events that we sign up for or go to as well to kind of play to our strengths.
100%. And that's where rehearsing comes in, right? Where you can say, this event is going to be just pain and stress for me, and it's not worth it. I'm going to skip it, but I'm really going to give this one my all. I think putting some thought into it, social anxiety, there's a school of therapy, right, called exposure therapy, which a lot of people will do where they'll go like literally face their fears. And I'm not a therapist, so I'm not telling you to go do that. But I think you can rehearse your fears and have a plan, and that really helps.
That's great. Maura, we're coming close to the end of our time together. We have time probably for just one more question. But one of the things that you talk about in your book, The Anxious Achiever, again, this is Dorie Clark. We're here with Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better, and our guest is Morra Mele, the author of said book. You mentioned that one of the key issues that people dealing with anxiety have to find ways to cope with oftentimes is negative self-talk. And this is something that a lot of people have, the kind of proverbial voice in their head. What are some of your strategies or the advice that you have when people are just kind of, not being nice to themselves?
I know. I mean, the voice, right? We've all heard it. And the funny thing about the voice is that it has its greatest hits, you know? And I interviewed one exceptional executive from Google, and his voice says, "You're lazy. You're lazy." Where does that come from? And so part of it is playing detective and learning to hear the voice as a separate voice. Maybe it's not even your voice. Maybe it's your mom's voice. Maybe it's your dad's voice. Maybe it's your coach's voice. Who knows? The voice work is something you can do in therapy and exploration, but the voice is separate. Okay, so the voice says this, I'm lazy. Is that true? Why is it telling me this? And then you can reframe the voice. You can tell the voice, I'm not lazy, and I don't appreciate that. I have worked extremely hard on this presentation, and I'm going to walk in and I'm not listening to you. You know, that cognitive reframing. If you are calm enough, sometimes we're so anxious, we just got to do some breathing and calm down. But if you're in a place where you can put this in the front of your brain and reframe and tell that voice to buzz off, that begins a practice of separating the voice and it not feeling so, frankly, normal anymore.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. And I realize, oh my goodness, I almost forgot, and we must not forget. Before we go, Morra, you have a nominee for Better Leader of the Week. And the Better Leader of the Week is a person that is on the ground, exemplifying the principles of creating a better workplace and a more diverse and equitable one. You have nominated Amelia Ransom from Smartsheet. And I would love if you could just talk a little bit about who Amelia is and why you have nominated her, Morra.
Yes, and I want to make sure I get her correct title because it's a good title. She's the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Smartsheet. And Amelia, for me, is one of the wise people whose counsel I always value. She is thoughtful and smart and on the top of her game, but she also has an incredible perspective and an ability to take others' perspective. And I first got to know Amelia when I was working on a big idea story for Harvard Business Review, right at the raging beginning of the pandemic on managing anxiety at work. And my editor said, you need to call Amelia. She was at Avalara then in a similar role. She's also an HR practitioner by training. And I said to Amelia, how can leaders be vulnerable during this time, but still be strong and competent? What's the magic? And she said, I'll tell you what I do. I open up space. I say, I can't predict the future, but this 30 minutes, this is our space. I'm feeling this way. Would love to check in with you, hear what's on your mind, see if we can make a plan. And just her sort of incredible willingness as a senior leader to be vulnerable and create space for other people to be vulnerable in an appropriate way, I thought was so powerful. And she's just a really phenomenal leader and a very kind person. Even though I don't know her well, I feel like I know her really well.
That's amazing. Well, 3 cheers for Amelia, our Better Leader of the Week. And we have been here with Morra Aarons-Mele. She's the author of this new book, The Anxious Achiever. This is Dorie Clark with our Newsweek weekly interview show, Better. Morra, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Dorie. It's so good to talk to you.
Thanks. Take care and see you next week, everyone.